The scream scattered the quiet like glass, and Eva clutched Liam as the hallway shook with Mark's exit. Sirens thinned the night air and Eva whispered, "It's okay," while Liam asked if the world had cracked. Eva said, "Only the door." Mark hurled one final glare, and the latch rattled like a verdict. The room smelled of rain and burned toast, and Eva's breath came in slivers. Grace called, and Eva said, "Not now," then softened, "Please stay on." Mark shouted from the stairs, and Eva flinched. "You won't win," he said, like a promise carved in ice. Liam's toy car rolled under the sofa, and he stared at the dark gap. Eva said, "We will find it later," though she meant something larger. Outside, an ambulance wailed and faded, a warning swallowed by weather. Eva felt the old weight return, heavy as a word she would not say. "You are safe," she told Liam, and the syllables steadied her spine. Grace said, "Breathe once for me," and Eva did, counting the beat of her ribs. The storm pressed its palm to the window, and the apartment held. "We are still here," Eva said, and the truth surprised her with heat. Morning crawled in pale and thin, and Eva sorted silence into tasks. Liam asked if school would feel different, and Eva said, "Different can be gentle." The hallway smelled of wet umbrellas and coffee. Grace said, "I can drive," and Eva almost accepted, then chose the bus. "We need the air," she said, tying laces with careful hands. The mailbox held only flyers, which felt like kindness. The elevator complained between floors, and Liam counted the bumps. "3 means lucky," he said, and Eva smiled despite the ache. Street puddles mapped the sky, and shoes wrote brief stories on water. "Today is for small wins," Eva said, while the city warmed its engines. A lawyer's number hovered in her mind like a storm cloud. "Not yet," she told herself, and tucked the thought behind her ribs. A dog barked at a taxi, and Liam laughed, and that sound rearranged the morning. Grace texted a sun emoji, and Eva sent a heart she actually meant. The bus sighed to a stop, and everything seemed almost steady. The envelope lay on the table like an alarm that refused to ring. Eva traced the seal, then broke it with a breath. "It is only paper," she said, though the words inside felt heavier than steel. Liam built a block tower nearby, whispering car noises under his breath. "We will keep the tower safe," Eva said, and he nodded like a foreman. The letter named dates and motions, and the room tightened. Grace said, "Forward it to me," and Eva scanned it with steady fingers. "I need facts, not fears," she said, collecting each paragraph like evidence. The radiator ticked its old metronome, and time learned manners. "We will answer," she said, as if speaking to the paper could tame it. Liam asked if towers can bend, and Eva said, "They can, and still stand." A thin beam of sun slid across the table and touched the signature line. That light felt like a witness with no bias. Grace arrived with coffee and a look that understood too much. "I read it," Grace said, and set the cup down like a treaty. Eva said, "Tell me what matters," and braced for impact. Grace traced a section with her nail and said, "Deadlines first." The word deadlines thudded but did not break the table. "We will meet them," Eva said, stacking tasks into a ladder. Liam asked for extra syrup, and Grace made a tiny smile. "Engineer fuel," Grace said, and the joke found a chair. Eva's phone buzzed with Mark's name, and she let it fade to quiet. "Not today," she said, and the air agreed. Grace said, "We make a binder, we gather records, we breathe." Eva repeated, "We breathe," and the room expanded by an inch. Outside, a truck coughed and moved on. Inside, the coffee cooled and steadied them both. Evening reset the walls with amber light, and the apartment felt almost kind. Eva sorted receipts into neat families, and Liam drew a rocket with too many windows. "More room for friends," he said, and Eva nodded like mission control. Grace called with a checklist, and Eva repeated each item as a vow. "Print medical records, request school notes, lock passwords," she said. The printer sputtered, then obeyed, and that small victory lifted the floor. Mark texted, "We need to talk," and Eva typed nothing. Silence can be fluent when used with care. She set a glass of water by the window and watched the city blink away. "We are not small," she told the room, and the room believed her. Liam asked if rockets ever return, and Eva said, "They do, and they land gentle." The night loosened its jaw, and tomorrow formed a shape she could name. The office lights hummed with cold persistence as Eva sorted files that no longer felt like hers. Her boss, Mr. Harris, tapped the desk and said, "You've missed 2 mornings." Eva answered, "I was in court." His sigh folded the air. The glass walls reflected her tired eyes, and whispers of co-workers carried more judgment than sound. She tucked her hands under the table to hide the tremor. "We need consistency," Harris said, sliding a notice toward her like a blade. Eva said, "My child is consistent. He needs me." He blinked, unmoved. A printer jammed in the corner, the sound biting into the silence. Eva steadied her breath and said, "I will not fail him." Harris looked away, already moving to the next complaint. The fluorescent glow washed her skin pale, but she held her posture tall. The clock hands dug into the hour like teeth. Eva whispered to herself, "I will endure." Eva stood outside the cafe where she had once laughed with friends, now watching through the window as Mark leaned close to 2 familiar faces. He smiled with practiced ease, his hand gesturing like a salesman sealing faith. Grace's absence echoed louder than her presence, and Eva clenched the strap of her bag until it left a mark. She pushed the door but did not enter. Their laughter cracked against her ribs, and she whispered, "They chose their side." Mark's voice carried faintly, "She's unstable. Courts see it." Eva's breath turned into frost in her mind, though the air was mild. The street lamp flickered above her, a witness too tired to care. "Loyalty should not cost truth," she murmured, stepping back into the crowd. Cars hissed through wet streets, and her reflection in the cafe window looked like someone else entirely. She turned away before she could argue with it. The courtroom smelled of wood polish and nerves. Eva sat stiff, eyes locked on the judge, who leafed through files as though skimming a stranger's life. A social worker, Ms. Carter, took notes with quick strokes that sounded like verdicts. Mark leaned back, smirking as though the outcome had already been written. "State your stability," the judge said. Eva steadied her voice. "I provide a home, routine, and love." Liam's photo peeked from her folder, and she pressed it like a talisman. The gavel tapped once, a reminder of who commanded time. Miss Carter's gaze lingered too long on Eva's clothes, her shoes, her hands. Eva lifted her chin and said, "I will not waver." Mark whispered to his lawyer, and they both smiled. Every word felt like walking a tightrope in a storm, but Eva's balance held. The rain against the window blurred the city lights as Eva drifted into memory. She was younger, standing in a factory corridor, grease on her hands, the echo of machines in her ears. "Double shifts keep us afloat," she once told Grace, her voice proud though her body broke. She recalled rocking Liam to sleep after 16 hours, whispering lullabies into exhaustion. That past clung to her skin like ink, but tonight it felt like proof, not shame. Eva touched the scar on her palm from a conveyor accident, remembering how she wrapped it, and returned to work. "I have always carried us," she whispered now. The reflection in the window showed the same woman, older, weathered, but unbroken. She pressed her forehead to the glass, watching streaks of light weave through rain, and vowed that the struggle had never been wasted. The apartment smelled of reheated pasta, and Liam's laughter clashed gently with Eva's weariness. She tucked him into bed, his eyes wide with trust. "Will you be here tomorrow?" he asked. Eva kissed his hair and said, "Always." The word carried iron. She sat at the table afterward, bills stacked like bricks, and began drafting a list: evidence, witnesses, rent due. Grace texted, "I'll help organize," and Eva exhaled relief. A siren outside reminded her that the world rarely paused. She whispered, I am not alone, though it felt fragile. The night deepened, and the lamp's circle of light turned the paperwork into a battlefield map. Eva's pen scratched steady lines, each word a promise carved in ink. She looked once toward Liam's door, and smiled, small but real. "We are still standing," she whispered, letting the truth anchor her into sleep. Afternoon light thinned across the cafe, as Eva watched Grace slide into a booth with Mark. Steam lifted from cups like coated smoke. Eva's chest tightened, and she stayed in shadow. Mark leaned forward and said, "We keep the story clean." Grace flinched, then nodded. Eva mouthed, "Why?" to the glass, and the word fogged. Grace said, "I only shared scheduling," but guilt bled through her tone. Mark smiled like a lock, clicking. Eva's phone buzzed with a reminder she could not bear to read. She typed, then erased, then typed again. "Say the truth," she whispered, as if the building might carry it in the vents. Mark said, "She is fragile," and let the syllables drip. Grace stared at her hands and said, "She is trying." Eva felt the floor tilt but kept her breath even. She stepped back from the window, saving the last view for memory. "This ends here," she told herself, choosing the door over the spectacle. Night gathered in corners while Eva sorted receipts into neat stacks. Liam paused at the doorway, hearing the edge in her sigh. He said, "Did someone break the rules?" And she answered, "Someone bent them." The answer tried to be gentle and failed. Mark called, and the name pulsed across the screen like a flare. Eva let it ring out, then said to the quiet, "Not tonight." Liam stepped closer with a drawing of a rocket and two stick figures holding a star. "Can this still fly?" he asked. Eva said, "Yes, if we guide it." He looked at the locked door, then at her hands. "Are we the guides?" he asked. Eva said, "We are." Daddle clicked off, and the hush felt earned. She gathered him into a side hug and said, "You did nothing wrong." Liam said, "I know," but his eyes asked for more. She said, "I am here," and let the promise seat itself between them. Morning in court arrived with crisp paper and closed faces. Eva sat straight, hands folded, spine taut like a line. Miss Carter adjusted her glasses and said, "Provide examples of stability." Eva described routines, meals, homework, bedtime stories, and calm. Mark's lawyer rose and said, "Explain the incident." The word "incident" swallowed the room. Eva answered with measured detail, naming dates and actions. Mark leaned back, feigning wounded patience. The judge said, "Keep to facts," and time clipped forward. Grace entered late, eyes red, and took a seat behind. Eva felt the thud of that choice, then returned to the ledger of truth. Miss Carter wrote faster, pen skidding like skate on ice. Eva said, "My home is safe," and let the consonants land. Mark whispered, and a grin licked the corner of his mouth. The clock ticked like distant boots. Eva focused on breath, pace, and simple light. The corridor outside the courtroom smelled of coffee and dust. Eva leaned against cool marble and measured the tremor in her hands. A voice said, "You dropped this," and a folder appeared in view. Daniel handed it over with a quiet steadiness. Eva said, "Thank you," and he nodded, neither prying nor pitying. He said, "I handle records for the clinic," and offered a card marked with clean lines. Eva weighed the card like a small life raft. She said, "I may need guidance," and the words surprised her with their ease. Daniel said, "Call if you choose," then stepped aside to let her claim the space. Grace approached, eyes rimmed with remorse. She said, "I am sorry," and the syllables trembled. Eva answered, "I heard enough," and did not add the hurt. The hallway clock hummed. Daniel gave a brief wave and vanished into the turn. Eva stood taller, folder secure, breath settling to level ground. Evening folded into the apartment with a bruised blue sky. Eva placed the folder on the table and sat on the floor beside it. She said, "We made it through today," and the room answered with quiet. Liam peeked from his door and said, "Did the judge like the truth?" Eva said, "Truth is slow, but it moves." He nodded and returned to his books. She opened the folder and arranged documents like stepping stones. A text from Grace blinked, "I want to fix it." Eva typed, "Begin with honesty," and set the phone face down. She let the day replay once, then pressed stop. Daniel's card rested near a paperclip, offering a path she had not expected. She said, "We accept help that honors us," and the words steadied her. The city hummed outside, not kinder but clearer. Eva closed her eyes and breathed until the hurt stretched into resolve. The storm began with paper, not thunder. Mark's lawyer filed new claims, and Eva felt the weight land like lead on her desk. Grace said, "They are pushing harder," and Eva replied, "They want me to break." The envelope listed accusations bent like wire, late pickups, unpaid bills, instability. Eva's hands trembled, but did not let go. Liam played in the next room, his laughter trying to pierce through the wall of words. Eva whispered, "We will not be erased," and underlined each page with a steady pen. The printer jammed again, and the noise felt like mockery. Grace touched her shoulder and said, "You have proof." Eva answered, "I have truth." The evening pressed heavy shadows into corners, but Eva did not retreat. She gathered files into a binder like armor. "If they want a war," she said, "then I will meet them in daylight." At work, the walls closed tighter than before. Mr. Harris slid a paper across her desk and said, "Your hours are reduced." Eva steadied her breath and asked, "Because of my case?" He answered, "Because we need reliability." The word stung more than the cut in pay. She looked at the clock, then at the stack of unfinished tasks. "I still do the work," she said, but his eyes drifted to emails. The office hum felt like rejection in chorus. Eva packed her bag with careful movements, leaving no trace behind. In the elevator she whispered, "They are building walls, but I will climb." The city buzzed outside, indifferent, but she stepped into it with squared shoulders. Each sidewalk crack felt like a test she refused to fail. Daniel called as Eva walked home through crowded streets. "You sound tired," he said. She replied, "I am, but I am not done." His voice was steady, a calm line in the chaos. "Let me help with records," he offered. Eva hesitated, then said, "I do not know who to trust." A bus roared past and she pressed the phone closer. Daniel said, "Trust only what builds, not what destroys." His words settled like stone in her chest. She looked at neon lights reflecting off puddles and said, "I will think about it." He said, "That is enough for now." She slipped the card back into her wallet, the edges softening against worn leather. The night smelled of wet concrete and roasted peanuts from a vendor. Eva whispered, "Help can exist," and let the thought move with her steps. Sleep found her in fragments broken by memory. Eva was back in her childhood home, the wallpaper peeling like tired skin. She saw her father's shadow in the hallway, the smell of whiskey and regret filling the air. Young Eva clutched a blanket, whispering, "Stay small." The memory cut into the present as she woke with sweat on her brow. She whispered, "I am not that girl anymore." Liam stirred in the next room, and she went to him, pressing her palm to his back until his breathing steadied. She sat on the edge of his bed and said, "I will not pass this hurt to you." Outside, thunder rolled far off, and rain began again. She let the storm echo the truth. The past may roar, but she would not bow to it. Dawn crept slow, and Eva brewed coffee like a soldier sharpening steel. Grace arrived with folders, eyes still red but voice steady. "We map the case today," Grace said. Eva nodded. "We make no mistakes." They spread papers across the table like puzzle pieces. Liam patted in with sleepy hair and asked, "Is this homework?" Eva kissed his head and said, "The hardest kind." Grace traced deadlines with a pen and said, "We can cover this." Eva breathed deep, feeling the weight, but also the net under it. Then we start now, she said, lifting her pen like a sword. The day opened wide, not easier, but clearer. The knock came soft but certain, and Eva opened the door to find Helen, her estranged aunt, standing with rain dripping from her coat. Eva said, "Why now?" her voice brittle. Helen answered, "Because I should have come sooner." Liam peeked from behind Eva and whispered, "Who is she?" Eva said, "Family." The word felt strange in her mouth. Helen's eyes carried years of distance and regret. She held out a folder thick with documents and said, "This is everything I saved. Letters, records, proof." Eva did not move at first, then reached out with a trembling hand. "You watched from afar," she said, and Helen nodded. "And I am done watching," Helen replied. The silence between them burned, but the possibility of something more pressed through. Eva said, "If you stay, you must stay all the way." Helen answered, "I will." They sat at the table, papers spread like confessions. Helen said, "Your mother wanted you safe, but I failed her." Eva said, "You left us." Helen's voice cracked. "I was afraid." Liam drew at the corner, silent but listening. Eva pressed her palm flat against a birth certificate, her chest tightening. Helen said, "These records can prove Mark lied." Eva looked at her aunt and said, "Truth has teeth." Grace called and offered to help organize, but Eva said, "Not now. This is family." Helen said, "I cannot erase years, but I can fight with you." Eva stared at her, measuring the depth of sincerity, then said, "We will see." The kettle hissed, and Liam's pencil scratched, making the sound of fragile continuity. Helen leaned closer, her voice heavy with something hidden. "Your father wasn't who you think," she said. Eva's stomach tightened. "Do not twist the past," Eva warned. Helen placed a photo on the table, a young man in uniform holding a newborn. He fought for custody once, but Mark's family buried it. Eva stared, her breath catching. "Why tell me now?" she asked. Helen answered, "Because you deserve to know you were wanted." The weight of years pressed against Eva's ribs. Liam climbed into her lap, asking, "Who is that man?" Eva kissed his hair and said, "Someone who tried." The truth hung in the air, sharp and soft. Eva whispered, "Secrets keep us sick." Helen said, "And they also save us if we use them right." Eva closed the photo album and said, "If we use this, we cannot turn back." Helen nodded, "Then don't turn." Grace entered quietly with her laptop and said, "I heard enough to know this changes everything." Eva glared but softened as Grace added, "I will not hide again." Liam yawned and curled on the couch, his drawing slipping from his hand. Helen said, "We prepare for war, but remember, truth cuts both ways." Eva said, "Then let it cut." The weight of new alliances pressed into her, sharp but steady. Papers stacked into order, voices calmed into rhythm. The clock clicked closer to midnight, and Eva whispered, "We are not powerless." The words felt like a candle in the dark. Midnight leaned into silence as Eva arranged the last folder. Helen stood, steady for the first time, and said, "I will testify." Eva met her gaze and said, "Then you must tell it all." Grace printed records, pages sliding out like proof made visible. Liam stirred, muttering in sleep, "We are strong," as though echoing their vows. Eva placed her hand on the folder, the paper warm from her touch. "This is no longer defense," she said. "This is battle." Helen said, "And you will not face it alone." Grace nodded, her eyes firm. The room no longer felt like burden. It felt like command. Eva whispered, "We will win, and if we do not, we will not break." The apartment settled into quiet certainty, the kind that lives just before the storm. Morning cut clean lines through the courthouse windows, and Eva walked with a binder held like a shield. Helen said, "I will speak first," and Eva answered, "Tell it straight." Mark studied the room as if picking a lock. Grace whispered, "We have timelines." Daniel nodded and said, "Details win." The clerk called the case, and breath left in a hush. Eva sat, spine aligned to purpose. Mark's lawyer rose and said, "Pattern of instability." The phrase struck like cold rain. Eva counted 3 breaths and looked at the judge. She said, "Our routine is documented." Papers slid across wood like skates. Miss Carter adjusted her glasses and watched without blinking. Helen squeezed Eva's shoulder and said, "We stand." The room smelled of polish and nerves. A clock ticked like soft hammer blows. The gavel tapped once, and the day began to narrow into proof. Helen took the stand and held the oath like a fragile bird. She said, "I failed before, but I tell the truth now." The courtroom leaned forward. Mark stared through her, as though memory were optional. Helen opened the folder and named dates, signatures, and school letters. She said, "Eva kept order when life did not." Mark's lawyer snapped, "Motive." Helen said, "Remorse is motive enough." The judge lifted a brow, and silence tightened. Helen placed a photo down with steady hands. She said, "This is continuity, not chaos." Eva kept her gaze level and let the truth do its quiet labor. Grace tapped a note and mouthed, "Strong." Daniel wrote a list of follow-ups like rungs on a ladder. The clerk marked exhibits. The air felt less hostile, like a door unlatched. Helen stepped down, lighter by a decade. Cross-examination moved like ice across glass. Mark's lawyer said, "Isn't it true you were absent for years?" Helen answered, "Yes, and still the records are accurate." He pressed, "You owe her loyalty." Helen said, "I owe the child truth." The line held. Miss Carter asked for clarification, pen poised like a scalpel. Helen recited bedtime logs, teacher notes, and clinic visits. Eva breathed through each metric and found steadiness in numbers. Mark leaned to whisper strategy, but the moment wobbled. Daniel slid a small note to Eva that read, "Stay simple." The judge said, "Facts only," and the heat in the room cooled. The lawyer tried one more angle, and Helen replied, "Pattern shows care, not neglect." The gallery exhaled. The gavel touched wood to mark the close, and the tension eased by a notch. Afternoon shadows sharpened edges as Miss Carter addressed the court. She said, "I observed the home 3 times." Mark shifted as if the chair had grown thorns. Miss Carter described routines, meals, and homework as steady anchors. She said, "The child appears attached and secure." Mark's lawyer objected, and the judge waved it off. Miss Carter added, "There was a night of conflict, documented, but safety protocols followed." Eva felt the room tilt toward fairness. Grace's shoulders dropped an inch. Daniel noted the phrasing that mattered most. Mark rose for his own testimony, smoothing his tie like a mask. He said, "I only want stability," and the word rang hollow. Miss Carter closed her folder and said, "My recommendation favors continuity." The sentence landed like a bell. The courtroom thinned to breath and heartbeat. Closing statements stood like bookends. Mark's lawyer said, "Doubt should govern, dressing fear as prudence." Eva rose and said, "Stability is not a promise, it is a practice." She named mornings, dinners, homework, and care. She said, "The child's peace is the point." Her voice did not shake. Grace watched with wet eyes she did not hide. Daniel nodded once, quiet approval. Mark stared at the table, fingers tapping a rhythm that betrayed him. The judge folded hands and said, "The court will review." The gavel did not fall yet. Silence widened and held them all without favor. Eva gathered her binder and touched the photo inside like a vow. She said, "We came in truth," and let the words stand guard over the waiting. Morning settled over the courtroom like thin gold, and Eva rose with the room. Judge said, "This decision favors continuity," and the words struck clean. Mark stared at the table and tapped a stalled rhythm that betrayed him. Miss Carter said, "The recommendation stands," and the line held steady. Grace squeezed Eva's hand and said, "You did it," through grateful tears. Eva answered, "We did it," and felt what was lost flicker. Then quiet. Judge added conditions for visitation and compliance, measured and firm. Helen exhaled years she had carried like stone, and nodded once. Daniel said, "You earned this," with a calm that steadied the air. The gavel touched wood, and silence softened into something like peace. On the courthouse steps, the city breathed louder than their hearts. Mark said, "This is not over," and his voice slipped on the edges. Eva answered, "It is lawful now," and let the words carry weight. Grace said, "We plan next moves, but tonight we rest." Helen touched Eva's arm and said, "I stand with you until the end." Daniel said, "Boundaries protect peace," and handed a card with resources. Eva looked at the sky and said, "We will rebuild slower and truer." Mark walked away, phone pressed tight, swallowed by traffic and noise. Eva closed her binder and felt the ground accept her stance. She said, "Cost paid, lesson kept," and stepped toward the day. Home smelled of laundry and crayons, and Liam waited by the table. He said, "Do we stay?" and his eyes held a sky of questions. Eva knelt and said, "We stay, and we make gentle days." Liam asked, "Are we safe now?" And she answered, "Safer," and watched by love. Grace texted a heart, and Eva sent one back she meant. Helen brewed tea and said, "Tonight we eat and breathe." Daniel messaged, "Resources ready," and left space instead of pressure. Eva said, "We will set new rules, soft but strong." Liam drew a rocket landing on a calm planet and grinned. She said, "We guide it together," and the room agreed. Evening stretched long shadows in the park, and air tasted like rain's echo. Daniel said, "Walk with me," and Eva matched his unhurried pace. He added, "No rescue, just company, and let quiet carry meaning." Eva said, "Company is enough," and watched Liam chase a drifting leaf. Liam shouted, "Look, it lands softly," and laughter unknotted the day. Daniel said, "You draw the borders, I will honor them." Eva answered, "Slow is the only speed that holds." They sat on a bench and let stillness do the teaching. Streetlights blinked awake, and the sky held a bruise of purple. Eva said, "We move forward, measured and clear," and breathed easy. Night folded the apartment into a quiet that felt earned. Eva stood by Liam's door and listened to his even breath. She said, "We are stronger now," and the words fit the room. Grace texted, "Tomorrow we archive and rest," and received a yes. Helen turned off the kitchen light and whispered, "Proud of you." Daniel's message read, "Here if needed," and did not demand more. Eva sat at the window and watched the city blink in patient rhythm. She said, "We will never stop fighting, but we will live first." Liam stirred and smiled like a dream had agreed. The night held them, not as fragile, but as whole.